Hello and welcome to my spoiler review for Disney's live-action Cinderella, a movie which will both enchant and annoy you as it gets so much right but also so much wrong. We're going to discuss all of that in detail right now, but again, this is the spoiler review. So if you have not yet seen Disney's live-action Cinderella and you want to avoid spoilers, then I hope you'll click here to watch my non-spoiler review and then come back once you have seen the movie. And as always, if there's something specific that you just can't wait to discuss about the film, then I urge you to check out the video description where there are times noted for each topic of conversation that we're going to cover here in the video. Or you can just watch it straight through at your leisure. Alright, so last warning, we're heading into spoiler country. Alright, so for this film, we're actually going to start out, we're going to go over the cast members. Usually I do these spoiler reviews by characters, but I think I want to start out with the talent behind the camera because that's where this movie truly shines and fails. Yes, a lot of mixed emotions about Disney's live-action Cinderella. Success and failure all mixed into one glorious, tasteless concoction. Alright, so we're going to start out with Kenneth Branagh, the director. Obviously, he is very good at visuals, not just off of Thor, which he did for Disney Marvel, but then also many of his Shakespeare adaptations, film adaptations, have been quite visually stunning. And I'm surprised, though, just how well he's able to do here. I think that this is such a fluffy, light concoction, which again is very shallow and superficial, that it's surprising that it would come from someone like Kenneth Branagh, who's supposed to be pretty intellectual and deep. So I can only assume that he got his marching orders from Disney and misunderstood them. He was like, gorgeous to look at, check, we don't have to worry about anything else. So while I applaud him for doing such a great job with the visual aspects of the film, I'm really surprised that he wasn't able to, and now we're going to talk about Chris Weitz, the screenwriter, go to Chris and say, you've handed me some real crap here. You didn't really do any work, did you, Chris? I'd be curious to see how much time you actually spent on this. Now, Chris Weitz is someone who is getting a lot of big projects, and it seems to be someone that Disney has a lot of faith in. He is not only scripting this film, but he's scripting the first Star Wars spin-off. He was brought in to take over for the writer who walked off of the Gareth Edwards film that's currently in pre-production. They're getting ready, and they're starting to cast it, actually, as Chris Weitz works on the script. But I would say, not too fast, Lucasfilm division of Disney. You might want to take a second look at what he's writing over there. Because this is also the guy who wrote The Golden Compass. Now, he did a very good job with About a Boy with his brother, but I think since then, he hasn't really impressed anyone. I think there might be some people who are Chris Weitz fans, but I think they would be far and few between, especially when you really took a hard look at his resume. And I think, unfortunately, and I detail this quite a bit in my non-spoiler review, but he has a script here which has a lot of mixed messages, where it seems to talk about inner beauty, but the entire thing is just a focus on how beautiful everybody and everything is. So at the end of the day, it seems not only superficial and hollow, but a little bit, hypocritical, where you're like, you're full of crap, Chris Weitz, in Disney Cinderella movie. The prince wouldn't like Cinderella if she did not have so much cleavage. Which, by the way, I've never seen a Disney live-action fairy tale with a direct shot down someone's dress when she unfortunately got out of the carriage. I was like, man, I can't believe nobody's watching for this, especially considering how low that dress is cut in the first place. But overall, I have to give mad props to the production designer and the costume designer on the film. So they're getting their own section because it was just that spectacular. So the individuals in question are Dante Ferretti for production design and Sandy Powell for costume design. Now, I'm sure these names are familiar, particularly Dante Ferretti. Who would forget that name? But I think that perhaps they both worked incredibly in Hollywood. They have very long resumes on some very big movies. But I think the one that's probably closest to this one would be Hugo, Martin Scorsese's film, which, interestingly enough, was a beautiful film to behold, where the script also fell apart. But at least there, it stayed on the rails for about half of the film until it totally derailed. But very interesting that they seem to not have good luck with the scripts that they're working on. But the work they do here is quite spectacular. It's some of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful work I've ever seen. And I think that Disney has done, these are things that I think to this point had only been achievable in animation. But now you're seeing live action films that are just as unbelievable to behold. It's kind of like what Walt Disney imagined with Disney World. You really do feel like you're stepping into another dimension. And just breathtaking. I would say I've only seen production design at this level for The Great Gatsby, Baz Luhrmann's recent film where his wife, Catherine Martin, did the production design. She won an Oscar for it, I believe. She also did wonderful work on Moulin Rouge. She's quite talented, and I think that here, this team took two people to do the job that she did on Gatsby, but Ferretti and Powell do as good a job as she did in Gatsby. Some of you might argue that Gatsby also was flawed. I loved Gatsby. I thought it was very intellectual and had a lot of depth to it. But you know what? We'll see. Maybe some of you will like Cinderella while you dislike Gatsby. You know, it's all a matter of taste, obviously, when you're talking about film and not the box office numbers. And we'll see how Cinderella does at the box office. I suspect, I'm not sure actually how I suspect it will do. We'll see. I think it's quite strong, but I can't imagine repeat viewing because it's, as I said, sort of annoying. We'll get to that though. But I think also this is reminiscent of Robert Stromberg's work on the Disney live-action fairy tale movies to date. He did the production design on Alice in Wonderland, he did it on Oz the Great and Powerful, and then he directed Maleficent. And I think that, you know, to some degree you would think, well, is Robert Stromberg the creative talent responsible for the cohesiveness of the live-action Disney fairy tale brand? And, you know, obviously the answer is no, because this team does just as good a job, if not slightly better. I think because there's a degree of realism here. And that's what's, I think, so enchanting and intoxicating, and that it seems like a fantasy, but it does seem like it could truly exist. I think they do a good job of taking like fantastic elements and weaving them in with actual, you know, French elements of design and culture, not just for the time period, but, you know, I think France has kind of a timeless quality to their aesthetic, and that's very much on display here. So, a wonder to behold. And the costumes as well. Every costume. It was like paper dolls. They were just that amazing. And unfortunately, I wish that the story that was being told was as ambitious and had as much depth as the decisions that were being made in the visuals in terms of production design and costume design. All right, let's move on to the characters. We're going to start out with my favorite character, and that was by far and away Cate Blanchett as Lady Tremaine, a.k.a. the Evil Stepmother. And her cat, Lucifer. Lucifer was pretty darn well realized. Of all the animals, he was the best well realized. And I think it's because they didn't dote on him too much. He was there. It was almost like an Easter egg to fans of the animated classic, and then they just moved on. But Cate Blanchett did such a fantastic job here because her character had as much depth as was allowed. There was no depth in the script that she was given, but I think she layered in as much as she could with her performance. She looked amazing. Every time she came on screen, I was like, I want that. No, I'm sorry, I'd like that as well. Her hat collection alone was something like out of like the most wonderful Barbie fantasy you've ever seen. You know, or like old Hollywood glamour, like Joan Crawford. Actually, you know, I think Joan Crawford is an excellent example. A lot of similarities to kind of Mildred Pierce, etc. And that's a story told from the mother's perspective. And I think the daughter, of course, thought her mother was quite cruel. By the way, if you haven't seen Mildred Pierce, go watch Mildred Pierce. Fantastic movie. Turned Joan Crawford's entire career around. It's just a phenomenal piece of work. And quite forward-thinking at the time of how it realistically portrayed a single mother and a working mother. I wish that this film was as ambitious in that regard. But I think Cate Blanchett's performance is. And she just commands the screen. The way she's introduced when she first comes on, and first the cat jumps out of the carriage, and then she comes into the house and her face is obscured, and then when they finally reveal it, it was so amazing and so, I guess you could say Joan Crawfordy, that people in the audience actually laughed. But not because it was ridiculous, it was just that on point and amazing to behold. I think that if I were to see this film again, it would be for Cate Blanchett's performance. And if I was to tell you to see the film, it wouldn't just be for the production design and the costume design, but for Cate Blanchett's performance. And I wish that she had gotten her own movie, a la Mildred Pierce, as Angelina Jolie did with Maleficent. But just fantastic. And there was a lot to be said about her character really having her hands tied, as I discussed in my non-spoiler review, at the times that she lived in, and there was only so much she could do as a woman. And darn it, she's trying her hardest, despite being given very little to work with. And on that note, by the way, just on a side note, my favorite hat, I have to say it, was the one with the blue curl when she's talking to the Duke. It was almost like an electric blue curl, but it was just the color, the way they made it pop with the lighting and the color that it was, balanced off of in the rest of the hat. It was just just like, wow, that will stick with me for a long time. All right, let's move over to her daughters, Anastasia and Drizella. I also liked the way they were realized here in this film. I thought because it also included a degree of realism. I thought a lot of the coping mechanisms they gave these daughters, not just the coping mechanisms, but their blind spots, which made them the people that they were very well realized. And I think it made them an accurate depiction of people that I think most of us have actually met in real life. So I like that while their costumes were a little cartoonish, I don't think that their demeanor was. The actresses playing them were Holliday, Grainger, and Sophie McShera, also from Downton Abbey. She plays Daisy the kitchen maid, and I think she was a little Daisy-like, but just Daisy-like enough to appease fans of Downton Abbey, myself being one of them, but while creating a different character. So I liked them very much for that reason. Now let's move on. We're going to kind of go by families here. So we've just covered the Tremaines. Let's move over to Cinderella's family. And I have to say, I was not a fan of Cinderella's family. They were, unfortunately, simple folk, and not in a good way. I thought that Cinderella really mistook her mother's message to her about kindness and courage. And as I said in my non-spoiler review, it really seemed like she mistook courage for endurance. I think courage would be to leave your home, to stand up to those abusing you. But instead, Cinderella just took it as, I'm just going to grin and bear it. She almost was, it actually reminded me a little bit of Unbroken, and of course Zamperini's, now famous mantra, if I can take it, I can make it. But he was a prisoner of war with an end in sight. The war would eventually end or he would be killed. He was hoping, obviously, to make it. But that's not the case with Cinderella. This was a very different circumstance she found herself under. And, I guess maybe I would have been interesting if they had explored Stockholm Syndrome, maybe. They could have gone in that direction. But the direction they went in was just someone who, it was frustrating to watch her. I think a lot of the qualities of Cinderella that seem perfectly normal when you're a kid, I think when you become an adult are hard to take. For instance, when she talked to the mice. Actually, I recently turned off the animated movie because I tried to watch it again. It just was re-released, I think, a couple months ago or a year ago. And I was like, I really want to watch Cinderella. I have such fond memories of it. And I turned it off when she was in her attic room talking to her mice friends because I was like, you've lost your mind, Cinderella. This is really scary, I think it's, all women fear this, trying to go out into the world and make something of themselves. They're like, once they start talking to mice, it's time to do something. So I found that not charming and sympathetic. I was just kind of like watching someone next to you go nuts and be like, am I next? I did like, though, that with the mice, they kept the same kind of sound design that they used for the talking of the mice in the animated classic. That was cute. But again, her friends were mice. Also, the mice opened the window when she was trapped in the attic at the end so that the prince and his entourage could hear her singing and be like, there's someone else in the house. And it was like, if the window opens, Cinderella, why don't you open the window and climb out of it and escape and go to the prince who says he wants to marry you? It was very bizarre and made her very unsympathetic. Sure, she might have pulled a Pollyanna and fallen to her death or, be paralyzed, but at least she would have tried, darn it. This kind of giving up, I think, is, again, a very antiquated idea. And as I talked about in my non-spoiler review, this film, and surprisingly so for a film that comes out in 2015, does so much to advocate old world ideals of what makes the perfect woman. Lily James, I think, did as best she could with what she was given. I think it's hard to make someone who is so thick and unsympathetic the opposite, but I think she did the best that she could. She certainly did a good job portraying Cinderella as written, and she very much looked the part. Although, again, as I said in my non-spoiler review, if they really wanted to make a point about inner beauty, they shouldn't have cast someone so traditionally attractive. They should have gone with somebody who was attractive in a non-traditional sense, and also based on the strength of their personality, which, for instance, people always bring up Ever After with Drew Barrymore, who of course looks lovely in the movie, but also has so many other qualities as well. That just wasn't the case here. Also, it drove me crazy she wore the same dress every single day. I was like, people are changing costumes, Cinderella. Why don't you have any other clothes? And I think the way she fell into doing the housework of just trying to be kind, like, oh, you dropped that? I'll get it. Oh, you don't know how to clean your own shoes? I'll do it. I mean, it just was a good example of what a slippery slope that can be, and that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But the movie didn't even make a point of that. You just have to learn that for yourself, which I hope many of you do. Let's move on to Cinderella's parents. Again, I thought they did a poor job raising her. I thought that Haley Atwell, though, Agent Carter, I guess Disney is trying to create their kind of mini studio system here where they reuse the same actors. But I thought she was well cast and that she looked a lot like Lily James. I really bought that Lily James was her daughter. And when everyone kept saying, oh, you remind us of your mother, you're keeping your mother's spirit alive in the house, and why Lady Tremaine disliked her so much, it was believable. You were like, she looks nothing like her. I don't know what you're talking about. Get over it. Haley Atwell obviously had very little to do, as did the actor playing her husband, Cinderella's father, Ben Chaplin, but I thought their scenes together were very moving. The one discussion about what should I bring back to you, and Cinderella's like, bring me back a branch, and then when the branch was brought back after he died, it did get me. I was touched. I tugged on the old heartstrings. So kudos to the actors for getting that across. Although, I have to say, I was like, Cinderella, I'm not sure if you're, genuine or if you're just learning to flirt, because that's a pretty flirty answer about what you brought back. I'd be like, do I have to carry this branch? Can't you just ask for something else? I couldn't quite decide what side that fell on. Because they didn't do much to establish their relationship beyond that. It was very much like, daddy's little girl. Like, there's this phenomenon, and, it's something that happens in society. It didn't happen in my family, and, you might want to think about it and, how you've observed it in other people's families. But sometimes dads will kind of treat their daughters like, like non-sexual girlfriends. And it kind of like prepares women for that kind of relationship where someone else will eventually take over, the husband or, whoever you decide to spend your life with. So that's kind of like the situation that sometimes happens, and I felt was very much happening here. The father was filling this role until a husband could step in. My dad just treated me like a regular person, sometimes with the negatives that are associated with that. But I have to say, at the end of the day, in terms of fighting and stuff like that, or absent-mindedness, my dad didn't always remember to help me with heavy things, etc. But I think it made me very much, my own woman, and it gave me a sense of independence and, a need to accomplish things myself. So very interesting, and also that wasn't explored. So many things that could have been explored that were just left, lying there, unresponsive. All right, let's move over to Prince Charming. Richard Madden did a nice job. I thought the best thing I liked when he surprised everybody as he was hiding out with the guard when they were going around trying on the shoe. I was like, oh, that was so clever. I did not see that coming. What a good idea. Although you can only use that once, Prince Charming, although they made him into the king. I like that they made them the king and queen. I thought that was a nice touch. But it was like, you can only use that once. I hope it was worth it to find your wife, because you can't use that in any negotiations going forward. They'll be like, check everybody! The prince is probably hiding here somewhere. Maybe he can pull off that thing from Dumb and Dumber 2, like the human camouflage. Maybe that can be his next trick. But I think he did a pretty good job. He didn't have much of a role. I would have liked it if he had been, I don't know, he seemed as like simple as Cinderella, and I think that for a fairy tale that works, but if you want to talk about the realities of having to rule and deal with people who are very conniving, like both of them had to do, you have to be a little more on your toes than both of these individuals were depicted as being. I did think, as I noted in my non-spoiler review, that the interactions between the prince and Cinderella were pretty darn sexual, particularly when they had their first dance. And I was really surprised to see so much heavy breathing in a film aimed at families. And I was like, kids are watching this, right? I mean, that's really inappropriate behavior for a dance in public. Save that stuff for the garden, guys. So a lot of emphasis on touching the waist and, a lot of cleavage. It was odd for this kind of movie. I think it was almost as disconcerting as the kind of rape scene in Maleficent. Only imagine that being brought up several times throughout the film. You're like, what? I know what you're doing, and I don't know if it's appropriate. Let's move on to the prince's family of the king, played by Derek Jacobi. I thought that their interactions were very nice, very touching. Of course, we all knew the king was going to come around. I'm not quite sure why he had to die. It's the old Disney thing of like, take away their parents. It's quick character building. Get a few tears from the audience. But I thought their relationship seemed very real, and he had some interesting facial hair he was sporting there. I kind of got a little distracted watching the movie, being like, I wonder what it's like for these male actors to have to put this facial hair on and walk around with it. Like, their clothes are kind of cool, but their hair is kind of ridiculous, so how does that kind of wash out at the end of the day on how you feel walking around set? Speaking of ridiculous hair, I think the winner of that competition by far and away is Stellan Skarsgard as the Duke. And making the Duke a villain, considering he's such a friendly figure in the original animated classic, was an interesting twist. But I liked his character. I thought it was much more realistic to the kind of people who would actually surround the royal family, especially when they actually rule. They aren't placeholders like royal, just there to do good for the country from a social standpoint, as royal families most often do today. It's important to remember that in the times when these fairy tales took place, these people actually ruled and were the governing body. So they would have people around like this. So I liked that element being added in there. I also thought, wow, was there not a better match for Lady Tremaine? When they ran off together at the end of the movie, I hoped it was together, because I was like, boy, you guys are such a perfect couple. I don't know if you see the sparks that are flying here, but you guys could do a lot together. Go forth, and that would be a movie I'd be much more interested in. The Duke and Lady Tremaine on the run. I'd be like, this is going to be amazing. Maybe she can fix his hair. And then also the captain, that's the best friend, played by Nonso Anozie. I think clearly the role was just there to add diversity, and that's like the worst kind of diversity that you can bring. They had some other diversity. They had a few families that they tried to show, like the kingdom was diverse, but it was so fleeting that you were like, it's just a diversity check. Those are just token characters, man. And then also I thought that the captain character was just so, it's a stereotype at this point. The friendly black guy, all the white people like having him around because he's always so happy and he tells them what they want to hear and he's got their back. And you're just kind of like, as upsetting as I might find the stereotypes that Cinderella perpetrates, I wouldn't be surprised if others find it equally annoying with the stereotypes perpetrated by the captain. All right, let's finally move on to the Fairy Godmother, of course, played by Helena Bonham Carter. She does a nice job. She's very forgetful. I think the original Fairy Godmother was kind of forgetful, but, this was, like, really dipsy. But she seemed fun. She seemed kind of like the sorority sister, like someone who, or, your older sister would be like, I'll help you go. You can sneak out the window. So I thought that was good. She looks beautiful. And I think she tried to make some interesting choices. I think they'd be more interesting if it wasn't the same choices that Helena Bonham Carter always makes as an actress in this type of role. But she tried. And it was at least more interesting than what I think Lily James was doing. And again, it was a situation like Cate Blanchett where you were like, can't we just follow this character? Nope, we're back to Cinderella. Okay. But Helena Bonham Carter, again, looked very beautiful, which again was a mixed message about the importance of inner beauty versus outer beauty when they were focusing so hard on everyone's outer beauty and pulling out all the stops. Although I have to say, I wonder if sequins and like jewels pasted into people's hair will catch on, because it looked pretty amazing. It must have been a pain in the butt to apply. Not everybody can have someone in the costume department sitting there with like a little glue gun and a wig, but it was just spectacular and the effect was amazing. So I wouldn't be surprised if at a couple of weddings and proms, etc., you see some women doing that. All right, so that's my spoiler review. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write your own thoughts about the movie down below. And again, this is a spoiler review, so you can write anything you want. Don't worry about ruining the movie for anybody. And you can check out some other episodes right now.